Hello, and welcome to Pagan Perspectives by Georgina Rose. I am Georgina Rose. I'm your host. I am a thelemite, perennialist, and polytheist. And on this podcast, I give a pagan and metaphysical perspective on the mundane issues that plague our daily lives. And this podcast has gone really off topic of that theme and has kind of become my yap session. But in this episode, I'm actually going to do what this podcast is supposed to be: use paganism to solve your mundane problems. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about a rather controversial topic. I don't think there's any way I can talk about this and not at least piss someone off. And that is the topic of using magic to fix your physical health, and kind of, can you use magic to fix your physical health? What are the limits of this? And when we talk about like healing from a metaphysical perspective, a lot of the time healing discussions are more psychological and emotional and spiritual healing. Like when people talk about like getting spiritually healed or like they're a healer, a lot of the time in the metaphysical space they do mean like your emotions or your traumas or your pains. Like that's a lot of what people go to occult spaces for healing to deal with, right? Like using it to help you get through your struggles and your difficulties. But there is a long and robust spiritual tradition of people using magic, witchcraft, and mysticism to heal physical diseases, injuries, plagues, pains. And actually, if you ever read the headless ritual or the bornless ritual all the way through, it says something about pains, plagues, and infirmities in the same sentence that it mentions, demonic possession, that it mentions, miasma, right? Like this, there is a long history of this. And, if we take a historic perspective, physical health and spiritual health were not really understood to be separate in the way that they are now. And so now I will say, using occult techniques to heal physical health is not as much in favor in the occult community. Now, you do see it a lot in the more new age community. I feel like a lot of like occult and traditional medicinal practices have kind of been absorbed into the broader alternative health and holistic living type world. So like, if you're like me and you're in kind of the ceremonial magic world and the platonic pagan world, like you don't see a lot of it, you don't see a lot of discussion about it. But if you look to like broader, spiritual spaces, you do see a lot of this idea of like using manifestation, using energy to heal the physical body. And I think there is this kind of, I don't know, kind of dichotomy where whenever people talk about using spiritual healing for physical diseases, it gets immediately thrown into the New Age camp. And it's assumed that anyone talking about these things is a New Ager. That's objectively not true. That's historically false. And that's ceding a lot of ground to another community that we shouldn't necessarily cede. Now, the tricky thing with this topic is how much magic and spirituality can help your physical state is a very debatable topic and a very polarizing one, and one where people can start thinking in extremes really quickly. I think people can go in one of two directions, and there aren't as many people in that middle ground as I think there should be. And I do want to, plead the case of these two directions before I start talking about how you could use magic to cure your physical health. So, the camp one is there is no spiritual way to heal your physical health, and to say that there is pseudoscientific and dangerous and puts people's lives at risk, right? This side is that, anyone peddling a spiritual cure to a disease is preventing them from seeking out, modern allopathic medicine, right? Like that it's very antagonistic. It's assuming that any sort of spiritual healing is objectively against, allopathic healing. And allopathy obviously does get results for a number of conditions. And so, since we know allopathy has in many ways extended human life, to argue for a less allopathic approach to physical medicine is inherently dangerous. Or that, like, these ideas, they are used to scam people. They're used to take money from people who are desperate for answers, you know, and there's some truth to this camp a little bit. I think specifically with the scamming thing, I think there are people who do scam people who need, some more modern medical treatments. I think that is a real problem, and I think that does need to be addressed. I think magical practitioners of physical healing need to be aware of their limitations and not, like specifically with cancer. There's a lot of people who try to do mystical healing for cancer. I think that if it's not done in conjunction with, modern medicinal healing is a very dangerous thing to say. I don't think you should say, your tincture is going to cure someone's cancer or your Reiki is going to cure someone's cancer. I think that is something that should be heavily criticized, right? Especially with certain types of cancers now, like certain types of breast cancer, where there are now, medications that are known to be able to fix certain forms of breast cancer, right? There's now like pills that can help with parts of breast cancer. As well with physical injuries, there are, a number of spiritual practices for physical wounds. And, if you were to neglect all of allopathy with someone who's having like a hemorrhage, they could bleed out and that could be an incredibly dangerous situation. And I think this camp needs a lot of respect for bringing up those concerns. I think there are inherent limitations to spiritual healing of physical health. And I think there's some truth to that. But where this camp loses me is it becomes very antagonistic to any sort of spiritual ideas of physical healing. Like it says that all of it is nonsense, all of it is made up. And that's not true. A number of spiritual healing modalities are actually kind of becoming backed by science. There's an interesting thing happening with science right now where it's kind of slowly becoming more accepting of spiritual ideas again, though it does tend to divorce them from their context, divorce them from their traditions, which I don't like and I'm highly critical of. But yeah, I mean, I think that camp, it just can get so extreme so fast, even though, the concerns are rooted in something real, right? You can't use magic alone to fix someone who is hemorrhaging actively, right? Or like to solely cure an infection, right? Because that can be dangerous and that can be risky. But at the same time, the demonization of any sort of non-allopathic technique is equally dumb. It's equally arrogant. It's equally egotistical because there's a lot of evidence that non-allopathic techniques can help people. They might not help people in the same way. They might work a bit differently, but if they're done in a way that's not, a scam type situation, like it documented that a number of them help, like acupuncture, which is based in traditional Chinese medicine and Chinese understandings of energy work, right? Acupuncture is a spiritual practice, has helped a lot of people. Same with chiropractic. Chiropractic is a magical system. I know that sounds really weird to most people because chiropractic we actually think of as allopathy a lot of the time. A lot of people don't know that chiropractors aren't even doctors. Chiropractic was supposed to be like a religion, actually. The guy who founded chiropractic says he was visited by a ghost who taught him these techniques, and he thought chiropractic should be like a holistic way of life. So, like, if you've ever gone to the chiropractor to help your back problems, you have benefited from magical healing. Now, there are some chiropractors who can be criticized, but generally, magical healing does clearly have some results of chiropractic and acupuncture, which we don't think of them as that, but it's true. They are rooted in religious and esoteric belief, like do have results. So it's kind of that's an extremist stance. And of course, the people who reject all of allopathy and say you should only do spiritual healing, that warrants a lot of criticism because that's obviously, an overcorrection. Generally, I believe that both are valuable and that you don't need to choose. I don't think you need to choose a team or choose a path. I think you can incorporate the parts of allopathy and spiritual healing that you like. I don't think you need to choose it all. And in fact, I think they work really well together, right? I think let's say you're healing, like a relative of mine recently had surgery on their hand. Um, obviously they would get the surgery on their hand, but then they might also want to, try out using some herbs to help them with the inflammation, some herbs to help them, with the pain, maybe saying some prayers to a healing God to expedite their healing, like stuff like that. They can go together. This is not some dichotomous conversation like everyone wants to have about this topic. And that's where the controversy lies, is people think in extremes about it. They think you either have to, use only allopathy forever and demonize anything holistic, or you need to only use magical healing. And if you like go to the doctor, like you're an idiot, right? Neither of those things are logical or based in any sort of reason. So I will say I am advocating for throughout this podcast a syncretic approach of these two things. I don't think either extreme is good. I think there's a lot of truth to mystical healing, but it has its limitations. Really, this does speak to a big problem people have when they think about religion, and that's that they think about this idea of a dichotomy, that there is the material and there is the spiritual, right? That there's this duality, that these things can't go together, and that's not real, because if you look deep enough into metaphysical tradition, you see very quickly that there is this idea of there is no separation. The mystical and the physical, they're not separated at all. They're actually one, right? Everything is part of the same chain of being, and everything is happening all at one time. So there is no, you have to choose, right? Because that doesn't make sense. because also when you're healing yourself physically, you're also healing yourself spiritually. In general, you can think of it as a triangle. Physical, mental, and spiritual health are like the three corners of a triangle. All three of them need to exist for the triangle to exist. You cannot be spiritually healthy if you are neglecting your physical health. You cannot be physically healthy if you are neglecting your mental health. You cannot be spiritually healthy if you are neglecting your mental or physical health. All three things need to exist together, and they all help each other. So even making material change to fix your physical health, like to say stop you from bleeding out, even if you're not doing that in an esoteric way, you are still helping yourself esoterically, because fundamentally everything is connected. Everything is one. At the end of the day, everything is one. We all are part of one greater power. And so, you have to work with it all together. There is no separation. This real idea that these things are some dichotomy that can't work together is a very modern form of thinking that doesn't serve us in a spiritual way. So let's start talking about basically what methods you can use to heal yourself esoterically, and to use magic, to use the occult to heal yourself. So first I'm going to start with a very pagan approach, a very Western pagan approach, and we're going to go, turn our calendars back to ancient Greece and Rome. There is a god that is the most helpful god for physical illnesses of all. This is Asclepius. So Asclepius is a Greek god who is a very, very powerful god. He is the god of medicine, and he is called repeatedly the first of physicians. His symbol is a rod with a snake around it, and this is actually the original symbol of medicine. This symbol represents healing, and so actually, if you ever see that symbol on a ambulance, on a hospital door, it is invoking the power of Asclepius. Asclepius is the son of Apollo, and he has three daughters, which are the three real basis of metaphysical, like healing modalities. Hygeia, this is the one you're going to hear the most. Hygeia is the goddess of hygiene and health. Iso is the god of healing and recovery. Esco is the goddess of the healing process. Igel is the goddess of good health, and Panacea is the goddess of remedies. The big one they're going to hear the most, though, is Hygeia. That is the most important of Asclepius' daughters, because Hygeia, or hygiene, is how you maintain constant health. You'll see Hygeia invoked a lot in old medicinal charms. Same with Asclepius. Asclepius is the main god of medicine, and he is the son of Apollo. For this reason, Apollo actually does have a connection to healing as well, but it is secondary to Asclepius. Asclepius is a very, very important god, and there are a number of temples. He has the epithet of the healer, and he basically is all about healing pain. He was born to heal pain. And he is known to be able to do, like, in the myths of Asclepius, he brings people back from the dead. He is able to eradicate pain, and his gifts were that he can heal. And Asclepius was prayed to extensively in the ancient world to heal. And actually, the Hippocratic Oath, which is the thing that every doctor to this day swears, originally began with, this has been removed, a invocation of Asclepius and Hygeia. And Apollo is mentioned in there as well. That is the original Hippocratic Oath, the original pledge that you have to make to become a doctor. Now, this has since been removed. When the West was Christianized, this was removed. But originally, to become a doctor, you literally had to invoke and essentially initiatorily dedicate yourself to the magic of Asclepius. So to bring in Asclepius, you really just need to pray. And the reason why I recommend this is because you're probably not going to be calling up Asclepius unless you are sick or someone you know is sick. Now, you can develop a permanent relationship of devotion and worship to Asclepius, especially if you're a doctor. I do recommend this. Any doctors, or, same with like naturopathic healers who might be listening to this, herbalist, really, really valuable to honor Asclepius. Also, if you're a midwife, or any sort of profession where you're dealing with healing people physically, I do recommend, developing a permanent devotional relationship with Asclepius, putting his symbol in your house, on your altar. Because Asclepius does not solely, rule over like modern medicine. Any sort of physical health practitioner should probably be worshiping Asclepius or praying to him sometime. Now, if you are sick, it is wise to pray to Asclepius when you are sick or injured. There's a number of prayers. There's some old ones, and there's some contemporary ones. There's some really beautiful ancient ones, some modern ones. One that I really like is there's a prayer within the Pagan book of prayer. That's really beautiful. There's also one online that I really like. I'm going to pull up the website name. That's really, really beautiful. It's from Helion. Yes, it's called prayer to Asclepius for the sick. It's by Melissa, a writer for Helion. This one's on the internet, and it has it has like an offering that you give at the same time. And it's this really beautiful prayer. And you pray these when you or a loved one are sick. You modify it if it's you versus a loved one. So basically, the most classic way to bring them in if you are suffering is to say a prayer and leave an offering. For me, whenever I am sick or injured, I do pray to Asclepius, and I do it repeatedly every night until I'm better. And then even after I'm better, I say it for an extra 2 nights. I like to leave candles and incense and bread as offerings. Those are my favorite offerings to give to Asclepius. Asclepius is also quite associated with water in some ways. Like you'll see bowls and water imagery. So if you were to represent him elementally, I would use the element of water. Now, Asclepius is not a really as much an emotional healing god, but I don't see why you couldn't, bring in his blessings to heal you emotionally. Now, in terms of sustaining your wellness over time, Hygeia is really the one you want to pray to. Hygeia is the originator of the concept of hygiene. You can hear that right there. And she maintains it when you're healthy, right? You wouldn't really invoke Hygeia when you're actively sick, but if you're, say, like, let's say you've been battling with heart issues and you're currently doing good on your heart journey, that would be a time to really bring in Hygeia, to pray to her, to invoke her. And you can invoke and call in these gods too. I mean, with Asclepius, you could absolutely do a huge ceremonial ritual, but a lot of the times, like if you're in bed and you're in the hospital, you probably aren't going to want to get up and, put on your towel robe and do your LBRPs and all of that. You probably won't want to, but if you, were healthy enough, you could. And once again, if you were a doctor or healer and you have that devotional relationship, it would make sense to incorporate some ceremonial magic into your practice. You can find a lot of also old, traditional spells and traditional rituals that honor these two specific gods. As well, Apollo does have some major associations. Apollo is, of course, the father of Asclepius, the first of physicians. Not as immediately helpful, but good for sustaining your health. And you could also pray to Apollo when you're sick. You see Apollo written into a lot of healing prayers, and one of Apollo's epithets is also the healer. Both Asclepius and Apollo are highly associated with healing. Going off of Apollo, I mean, if you are not into the Hellenism stuff, any sun god will be really good for healing because the sun is the ruler of vitality. A lot of the mysteries of healing are solar in nature, excluding surgery, and I'll get to that in a second. If we're talking about general healing, that is solar aligned. And if you're looking at your astrology and your natal chart, look for solar changes within your chart to note major shifts with your healing. As well, if you want to have some insight into your health over the course of your life, within your natal chart, one of the houses, it's called the 6th house, is the house of healing and health. And this house, whatever's going on in your 6th house in your natal chart, can give you a really strong indication of what your health throughout your life would be. And the sign, associated with that 6th house is going to tell you a lot about your lifelong health. Now, the other planetary energy that is associated, an entity that is associated with physical health, is Mars. Now, this sounds really counterintuitive because Mars is, of course, the ruler of sexuality, war, violence, aggression, conflict. Like, why would he be doing anything with healing? In reality, Mars is a really powerful healer, and surgery was originally a martial art, and Mars is actually, truthfully, the ruler of all surgery, because surgery is inflicting violence in order to heal. Whenever you need to harm in order to heal, you are doing something martial. And so when it comes to surgery, major life changes, Mars is a really powerful thing to bring in. If you are a surgeon, developing a devotional relationship with some sort of war god, some sort of martial god would be really, really powerful to improve your medicinal practice. But if you're undergoing surgery, you do want to petition to Mars. Mars is not evil. Mars is malefic, not evil. That's a very critical distinction that we all need to learn as mystics. And Mars can really help you through serious surgical and physical upheavals, as well if there's anything that needs to be removed from you. So once again, when we think about surgery, we're thinking about cutting and causing violence to remove. If you have, say, a tumor, of course you want to undergo, chemo and do all of that. But if you're undergoing chemo actively, while you're undergoing that chemo process, bringing in that martial surgery aspect would be really beneficial because it would help remove that on a spiritual level too and help you overcome that. On a psychological level, this surgeon aspect of Mars can be really good for eliminating parts of ourselves that need to go. Mars is very good at bringing in death and removal. And so if you have, some sort of condition that you're really trying to get rid of, Mars would be a powerful energy to bring in. As well, wherever Mars sits in your natal chart can be an indication of, violent acts or injuries you're going to get. Mars is very much associated with injury more so than disease. So if you want to know what injuries you might experience throughout your life, check Mars, check the house it's in, and check any sort of conjunctions that might be coming off of it, especially if it's, a conjunction with, say, Chiron, which is another healing placement. Astrologically, this is a good thing to look at too, is Chiron is known as the wounded healer. Chiron is an asteroid And the Chiron in your chart can point to issues. Now, most of the time, the Chiron does refer to mental issues, but it can sometimes refer to physical issues. Also, with Mars, fitness is martial, developing your body, getting in shape. That's very martial. If you're going to get really into fitness and exercise, you can devote that to Mars. I've talked about how a really powerful Mars planetary remediation activity is to devote your exercises to Mars, especially if there's something like a weightlifting or really intense cardio, like something that's challenging you. That can be a really great Mars devotion. I know someone in my comments was saying they do it was some sort of martial art. I don't remember which martial art, but they did a martial art and it was devoted to Mars. You hear that there? Martial art of Mars. All the martial arts are a really powerful way to devote yourself to Mars and get connected to Mars. If you want to stay in shape, you want to reach your physical heights, you really want to do that through Mars. And your physical body can be a way to worship. Movement is a correspondence, and there's many, mystical traditions that really are about moving the body, about moving around. And they're not all like in this like bro Satru, Aries cult way. Though that's cool. I mean, if you want to lift weights to the gods, that's cool. I think that's actually a good practice. And you can do that even if you're not like, I don't know. There's this image whenever someone talks about like lifting weights for the gods, people get this image of this very specific type of like Ausatru guy who people will joke and call bro Satru. Like there's a specific image people get in their head when they talk about like lifting weights to honor the gods. But like genuinely that is a good practice. You don't need to be like annoying about it. Like it is like a really good practice and it is a good way to honor because when you're doing something like that, you're challenging yourself and you're doing a devotional act. You don't have to fit that mold to do that. But yes, physical movement is super, super powerful and good mystically, and it preserves your health. Now, I want to talk about energetic healing. So, a big type of occult way people heal people is through energy. So, obviously, energy is a cosmic law, it's around us all the time, it's the sort of invisible element. If you look at the pentagram as a symbol, it has 5 points. The 4 points are for the elements earth, air, water, fire. And that fifth point, the one that points up, represents spirit. And spirit is energy. It flows through all things. And so there's a lot of systems from all around the world that use energy work in order to heal physical conditions. Now, I want to start this off with this point. The quality of energy work really, really varies. There's a lot of criticisms of some popular form of energy work where people will say they don't work or that they're not, well set up. A particular one people are highly critical of is Reiki. And the reason why people are highly critical of Reiki is not that Reiki doesn't work, it's that a lot of Reiki trainings and certifications are not very good. So Reiki is a traditional Japanese form of energy healing. And if you get Reiki done by a real practitioner who has studied and has a good lineage, like you can get a really good experience. But nowadays, like to become a certified Reiki healer, you basically need to have done like a 3-day workshop. And so a lot of people have basically just done a bad training, they have a bad lineage, and they're not really doing Reiki. They're kind of just like doing something else. And so with Reiki, I do always caution people to really research any Reiki practitioner you're going to, because you run the risk of like, I mean, they're not going to harm you, right? You're not going to get a Reiki practitioner who like harms you spiritually or like really messes you up or causes blockages. You just might get a Reiki practitioner who isn't very good, right? That's the real risk with Reiki. You might get someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and basically it's just a waste of your money. But if you find a real, legitimate Japanese, lineage Reiki practitioner, you can get a really powerful result. Reiki is the most popular form of energy healing here in the US. You can find a Reiki healer in pretty much every town. So that's why I brought that up first. But there's many other systems. There's some that are based on traditional Chinese medicine. There's a number of Chinese-based energy healing systems. There's a number of kind of like, it's generally very popular in Eastern esotericism, really. There's a lot of systems where they're Eastern based. They use techniques like touching, tapping, manipulating energy. A lot of the times how it works is you like lay on the table and they realign you, they work through blockages. And energy healers, basically what they do is they remove blockages, and these blockages, basically how it works, the general philosophy behind all systems of energy work, and I have to be way oversimplifying to even convey this quickly, but basically the general idea is that you have a physical body and then a metaphysical body, a body made up of energy. And just like our physical body, there is anatomy to the body of energy you have, like say chakras, points, right? It can get really, really complicated. You can see specifically out of some of the Chinese systems, these really complex looking diagrams with like hundreds of little like nodes and points. And they all represent channels and places where things can open and things can close. And basically what you do when you go to an energy healer is They look for blockages. Blockages are things that are stopping you from being as physically healthy and as powerful as you could be. And then they open those blockages, and people can report that, through these techniques, they can have less pain, better digestion. Those are kind of the claims you see with energy work most of the time, is like kind of like chronic problems that, mainstream medicine kind of doesn't treat that well. Like, especially with digestion, mind, body, gut connection is very well backed. And if you have a bad gut, it can affect you spiritually, it can affect your mind, stuff like that, or like weird pains, especially people who have like chronic conditions can really benefit from this type of stuff, because a lot of the time people with chronic conditions are basically ignored by the medical establishment. I mean, they're not given the care they need. They're kind of told like you have to suck it up and deal with it. Same with people with gut issues. A lot of the times, they just are told, oh, you have IBS, and then nothing is done about it. And like these systems can really help people with that. Energy healing is typically not used for very severe conditions. And if it is used for very severe conditions, it should be used in conjunction. But it is very good. And generally, energy stuff, if your energy is not flowing well in your body, it can affect you psychologically. Like with the chakras, like one that a lot of people struggle with is their throat chakra. And that's your ability to make your voice heard, and be heard and communicate. And a lot of people have blockages on their throat chakra, so they're not able to stand up for themselves. They're not able to have boundaries. And sometimes it can cause like, sore throat and stuff like that. So energy systems, there's a really complex, wide variety of them, but they all kind of operate off the same sort of logic. And once again, I mean, with energy healing, you really want to look into the practitioner you're seeing. Your quality is really going to vary. There's a number of systems that are kind of based off energy points, like reflexology, acupuncture. All of that is kind of has an energy work basis to it. And those systems generally actually have quite a bit of good evidence behind them. Specifically, acupuncture is a form of energy healing, which a lot of people don't realize. They think of it as just, the sensation. Acupuncture is widely recognized to be highly effective for a number of conditions, and it has a lot of scientific proofs behind it. I actually have an acupuncture board in my house, like a standing acupuncture board. It's like this board of like, they're not needles, they're like these little points that you stand on, and I find it super grounding. I love my little acupuncture footboard. It has the points in specific places, and so yeah, like, I personally really do enjoy acupuncture. It's very calming and grounding as well. So stuff like that is technically energy healing, even if we don't think of it that way. Now, there are Western forms of energy healing. People forget about this, but there are Western systems, especially the ones with that kind of theosophy basis, that do some energy healing. There's a specific ritual from the Golden Dawn called the Middle Pillar, that people are taught to use to raise energy, but it actually does remove blockages. So the Middle Pillar is a Golden Dawn ceremonial magic ritual that can really, really help you out. Now, let's talk about other Western forms of healing besides energy, because a lot of Western mystical systems are really not energy work based. Though, one thing before that, oh my God, I almost forgot, breath work. So, kind of adjacent to energy healing is breath. Breath is often understood to be life. Breath is incredibly powerful. There's an entire practice, it's one of the limbs of yoga called pranayama, that is all about breath control. Breath control is super powerful, and breath is widely documented to have a lot of power. Like, people who can control their breath can lower their heart rate. And I decided to test this. So I got one of those pulse oximeters from Amazon for like $7. And basically, I wanted to see how much this works. So I put it on my resting, and my resting heart rate was like 82. And once I had like gone deep into meditation, my resting heart rate was like 51. Like, it was a crazy drop. So yes, breath work, which I was using heavily when I was meditating then, can lower your heart rate. I tried it myself, and there's a lot of science to back this. Breath can bring you out of panic attacks, breath can calm you down, and breath can heal physical situations. So don't underestimate the power of breath. And this idea that breath is powerful, these specific breaths all are rooted in mystical tradition. This is not some modern scientific idea. This is an ancient esoteric one. And so whenever you use your breathing to calm you down, you are doing a form of spiritual healing. Now, back to Western forms of healing. A lot of Western occult healing gets really lumped into the witchcraft category. And I want to kind of explore that idea and that piece of our collective history. So this term witch doctor is used very derogatorily. It's used to demonize entire religions often. And what a witch doctor is it's someone using potions and spells to heal someone, or oils, like that term snake oil salesman is to demonize people who use oils within their healing. All of these terms, are basically like cultural terms for scammer. But our earlier understanding of these things was much darker. So in modern terms, someone uses like a witchcraft to heal a physical disease, they're basically called a scammer or a grifter. I guess that's the millennial and Gen Z equivalent of this term. But if we dial the clock back a little further, it wasn't that they were being called snake sales oil people. They're being called witches. And we are going to talk about the witch craze. I don't think I talk about the witch hunts a lot on this channel and podcast. I bring them up a little bit, but the witch hunts were largely a crime and attack against folk healers, right? That's a large percentage of the people who were actually burned. So there's a number of versions of the witch trials. There's a version where it was all hysteria and they just were all like mass burning people for no reason. That's certainly a partial truth. There is the version where it was a targeted sort of attack on healers, traditional medicinal practitioners, midwives. There's quite a bit of truth to that. And then there's another version where it was actual witches being persecuted. Now, you do see some people in occult spaces buying into that third category. Specifically, there's a kind of Wiccan retelling of the event, that the European witch craze was a genocide against witches, that it was, the burning times, that it was a targeted attack against European spirituality by Christianity, right? This is a very Wiccan narrative. There's a 1970s documentary. I think it's often called like a feminist documentary, called Never Forget the Burning Times. I have watched it. I watched it a couple months ago in preparation of an article I wrote. But it is this old documentary about how, they were witches, they were targeted. It was an attack on witchcraft as a counter religion to Christianity and an attack on the divine feminine. And this is a mythic history understanding. I don't think it's really based in the truth, to be completely honest. I think maybe there's some instances of that, but I don't largely think the witch trials were an attack on real witches or Wiccans specifically, because Wicca didn't exist back then. Though, of course, the re-Wiccan telling of history is that Wicca was given to Gardner as a continuation of this narrative, and of this secret tradition that basically during the witch craze, the witches were so persecuted, and then Gerald Gardner was taught their secrets to bring it back to the world. That's a very key Wiccan myth and understanding to that religion. But yeah, so largely who they were going after were folk healers who were being called witches, specifically midwives. Midwives were a huge target of the witch craze. Midwifery is largely based in a folk healing lineage, a lineage that has a big overlap with witchcraft. That is true. Midwifery is highly demonized, and was systemically persecuted and erased during this period of time. And it was, partially because, they were women, partially because they were doing women's work, partially because they were honoring the divine feminine, and partially because a lot of the plants they used did overlap with witching plants, right? The word witch in the Bible it's not the word witch. It doesn't say the thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. The word for that isn't witch. The word in the Bible is veneficia, coming from veneficium. This is a direct translation to sorcerer, but what it really translates to, if you take it even more direct, is poisoner. There was a general belief that midwives and that, these women who were doing herbalism were also poisoners, that they were dangerous and that they were a threat to society, that their traditional wisdom was undercutting society, that they were turning women away from being good women and into witches, right? It was a real fear of this type of woman. That is who is mentioned in the Bible as the witch. It is the veneficia, or the poisoner, because a lot of the plants that were used in historical folk medicine were poisonous at certain doses. Paracelsus, the father of alchemy, very famously said that everything is a poison. The only difference is the dose. So a lot of these usage of plants and plant healing were highly demonized and were called witchcraft. And now modern witches, modern pagans do revive these traditions of healing. Herbalism is very powerful, and herbalism is spiritual in nature. Herbalism is now seen as just an alternative way of healing, but there is a spiritual quality. There's this term that's used called phytonosis, or wisdom of the plants. And phytonosis is an entire mystical tradition where you connect to the spirits of the plants. You use them to heal people. You also develop a magical relationship with each plant. You honor the spirits within each plant, because when you are consuming an herb, you are in a sense swallowing it. And when you swallow, it is filling you. It's entering your body. And so in a sense, every time you consume an herb, you are being possessed by a plant spirit. And so there's this whole tradition of discovering wisdom from the plants, developing a mystical dynamic with the plants. And this is the basis of a lot of modern green witchcraft, is revitalizing phytonosis. The cult of Sabbati, which is a Sabbatic witchcraft group, and really the original Sabbatic witchcraft group, and kind of originator of traditional witchcraft, nowadays, under its new leader, Shoki, have a heavy emphasis of plant magic and phytonosis on its work. I mean, really, plants are known to have so much healing value. I mean, plant medicine can do so much. It can help heal pains, it can improve your mental health. And a lot of these traditional plants have actually been incorporated into modern pharmaceuticals. Pharmacoi or pharmaco was the traditional term for this. And originally, the idea of a pharmaceutical did not just mean drugs you get at the pharmacy. It also meant, the herbs you were given by the herbalist you went to. And a lot of these have been completely entered and integrated into modern drugs. Now, of course, a lot of plants are not, but we still know that they have some evidence behind them. One that I find particularly fascinating is St. John's wort, because it has such an obvious magical layer to it. St. John's wort is this plant that if you take a little bit of it, it can cure your depression, and temporarily it is highly backed by a lot of evidence-based studies that it does alleviate depression. But what's so interesting is recent data shows that if you take it for years and years and years, which you're not supposed to, it's supposed to be temporary, but if you did this, it would actually cause blindness. And it is a plant of the sun. It is known to be very solar. And what is more solar than bringing you joy in a little bit, but in too much making you blind, right? That is like the ultimate solar attribution. And if you are someone like me who's very, planetary magic based, you can learn a lot about the planets through the powers of the plants. As well, there is, of course, adjacent to plant medicine, psychedelic and entheogenic stuff. That's really not for physical healing, but that is an adjacent thing. I do think when people say plant medicine now, they do assume you are talking about the psychedelic and the entheogenic side of plant medicine, and that's only a small percentage. It's not the majority. I mean, it's not the main use you're going to have of plants. If you go really deep down, a magia naturalis, plant-based sort of mystical path, but that does exist. And I do wish we knew that like plant medicine didn't just mean like taking ayahuasca in the jungle. It also meant, using the herbs to heal your sinus infection. For me, I recently had a sinus infection, and so did my roommate, and we used herbs. We used herbal teas, and we actually cured our sinus infections. Herbal medicine is really, really powerful. And with time, more and more herbs are being backed as a, serious medicinal thing. There is another system that's Eastern or like origination that can kind of overlap with this a little bit, and that's Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a healing system that comes from the Vedas, hence the name. Ayurveda is more than just plant medicine. It's kind of more a lifestyle. It's very much overlapping with things like yoga. With those traditions, a lot of Ayurvedic preparations are essentially, plant medicine type concoctions, but there's a lot more. Ayurveda has a lot of dietary recommendations that are really interesting. Ayurveda believes in these things called the doshas, which are basically body types. I've talked about it before, and I did a Patreon series on the podcast Patreon where I went on for a couple of those pre-shows, kind of my journey with Ayurveda and with the doshas. And basically, based on the elements, you have a body type. There is Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. I might be pronouncing that wrong. So Vata is the air constitution, and it is thin, dry, nervous. Pitta, which is medium build, hot, athletic, prone to muscle, goal-oriented, sharp intellect, hot-tempered, and Kapha, which is stocky, easy to gain weight, nurturing, melancholic, compassionate affection, and it does relate it to personality as well. So it's really, really interesting, these three constitutions, and most people are not singularly one constitution. They're like a mix of a few of them, like they're Vata Pitta or Pitta Kapha, and you can learn a lot about that. And Ayurveda has whole recipes and food groups you're supposed to eat and avoid, and Ayurveda has a lot of really good longevity-based health outcomes, and this is very much rooted in Vedic spirituality. For me, when I went on my Ayurveda journey, I'm Pitta dominant. I am very much a Pitta. And I found once I started researching these physical characteristics, it matched a lot of my own health concerns and my own natural skills. And I really did improve my health quite a bit, messing with Ayurveda, and specifically with the recipes. I used a lot of like Vedic cooking recipes, and I found a lot of good results with some of my concerns. So yeah, Ayurveda is a very adjacent system, and you can totally, practice like Ayurveda and Western herbalism. It's not like you need to like choose one. It's not like you need to pick one. You can really pull from a number of these camps. And I also want to talk a little about yoga. So yoga is very misunderstood. Yoga is always understood to just be asana. Asana is the sort of limb of yoga that is stretching. and physical movement. In the West, we totally think of yoga as just asana, and that's not true. Yoga has many limbs. There are many parts of life that are about yoga, and yoga is fundamentally a religion. Yoga, that word means union. It's all about uniting with the Godhead, which if we understand esotericism, our end goal is what? The great work. The great work is uniting with the Godhead. That is the goal, and yoga really helps you get there. Aleister Crowley, the founder of Thelema, was a really big yogi. He loved yoga and he heavily stressed it. And on his list of recommendations for anyone who joins his student order AA, you are required to read a lot of yogic text. Crowley considered Thelema to be completely aligned with yoga. And yoga, the asanas are amazing. They're great for your health. And asanas can really reduce pain in your body. Like for me, when I have my period, I do specific yoga kind of asanas and stretches and postures to relieve PMS pains. And I've found really great benefits from that. It also soothes your mind. It brings you down from panic attacks. It removes pains in the body. It can also improve things like your pelvic floor. And it's very trendy to talk about pelvic floor and digestion and all of that. All of that can be really improved by yoga. And yoga is a mystical healing modality. Yoga is a religious practice. Yoga has been like completely destroyed by the health industry. Like now there's like yoga classes that play like Taylor Swift, and that's completely inappropriate in so many ways, or like yoga classes at like bars. Like it's very much blasphemous. But if you do yoga in the proper way and you find like a yoga teacher and studio near you that really does teach it the proper way. I'm lucky that even in my small town there is like a studio near me that does do yoga justice, that I attend semi regularly, that I have a really good time at. You can have really beautiful experiences. So yoga is definitely worth exploring, but don't go to like, bad places. Now, the last method is using your will alone to heal you, using manifestation, using pure intention. And this can definitely help. It's not going to do all the work. If you could, your intention can open doors, but you need to walk through it. So you really do want to, try this out, but it's not going to do it alone, but you can still make a lot of progress with your willpower. I mean, this is really like the mind over matter thing. Mind over matter is just a secular explanation as to why, your intention and your will can change things. You definitely can will yourself through things. I mean, I think childbirth is a good example of this. There's a lot of people who have unmedicated childbirths, and a big reason why they get through it and they don't get the epidural is that they use their willpower to sort of bring themselves through it, and their force of will to go through that experience and find it like transformative. Now, obviously, that's not like something you need to do if you want to be spiritual or whatever. That's obviously a ridiculous thing to say, but for some people, that is a journey they decide to go down, and for those people, they're using their willpower, they're using their intention to get through that. In general, willpower can really help you a lot because the way you think about things, the way you perceive things, sort of shapes your reality. But once again, this isn't the secret. We don't believe in the secret over here, okay? It's not that alone, right? Intention and manifestation is part of the puzzle, but it's not the whole puzzle. You want to do all these other things and also use your willpower to get you through your physical maladies. So that's all I have to say in this episode. I'm Georgina Rose. I'm a tarot reader and astrologer. You can book with me below. I'm posting a group retreat to Egypt next year. It's full, but there are waitlist spots, so you can sign up for the waitlist below. This podcast is supported through Patreon. If you join the Patreon, you get a bonus episode 8 times a year. You get pre-shows with every episode, and you get early access to everything here. I am Georgina Rose, or Dot Darling. I'm on every platform under the sun, most importantly, Instagram, Twitter/X/Xiter. YouTube, the Dot Darling YouTube channel is my main platform. If you're listening to the podcast on YouTube, just click on my face and you can see my YouTube videos, and TikTok. I am also on Substack. I do 2 articles a month on Substack if you want to read something that's written. And anyways, have a good day, afternoon, mid-morning, mid-evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. And thank you for listening to Pagan Perspectives by Georgina Rose. Bye!